Before we jump in, a note on our content for this episode. This is created for adult audiences only. We advise listener discretion for graphic depictions of violence and child sexual abuse. It might be a lot to take in, so if you need a breather, take a break or come back later.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 10 of the Unofficial Official Story. I'm Dwayne, the guy writing jokes for the class clown.
Hey, what up, everyone? I'm Jennifer, the fearless investigator.
And I'm Koji, the so-called chief of the show.
This is a podcast where we tell you the official story. We're going to take a look at the paranormal, conspiracies, unexplained phenomena, cryptids, and even true crime.
And in this episode, we're asking the question, who killed JonBenet Ramsey?
At the end, we'll tell you what really maybe happened.
Indeed. But first, we brought a guest, psychologist and writer, Dr. John Mayer.
Dr. John Mayer is a practicing clinical psychologist, author, and consultant. He received his doctorate from Northwestern University Medical School. He was honored by Cambridge as one of the top 2,000 scientists of the 20th century for his work in substance abuse in teens and families. I didn't know that about you, by the way, John. That was very interesting. Sorry. He consults to law enforcement, social service agencies, corporations, and healthcare facilities around the world. He's often the expert called in to headline cases involving youth. He's an acknowledged expert witness in court cases. And this is how I know him. He's an award-winning author and screenwriter. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a fascinating topic.
How's everything going with you?
Really good. Really good. Getting cold in Chicago.
How did you get into your line of work?
When I got into med school, I come from a poor family and I always had to have jobs. So I was kicking around what I wanted to be. At first, I thought I'd be a neurosurgeon, but I always thought the brain was the thing, the most important thing in our life. So I started to work in mental hospitals. And what I found I was really good at was helping kids, especially violent kids and kids on drugs. And I got very well known for that. And in fact, a program I started for criminal kids got national notoriety, shall I say, and we got referrals of really dangerous, creepy kids from all over the country. And, that kind of catapulted me. And then well before I graduated from Northwestern, I had a big reputation on dealing with criminals and kids who are violent and serial killing adults and all kinds of stuff like that. So that's what kind of started it off. It was a job.
Right. I actually like the fact that you said creepy because, we're so sensitive, but you can actually use that word and still be trying to help and still try to find solutions. You still have empathy. But to the average person, my brother's a doctor and before that, he worked in a mental facility just as a security guard or something. And he said it was something else,
Yeah, I can't tell you, Dwayne, how many times I've told a kid, "Hey, man, that's creepy. What are you doing that for? You're weird." People are going to look at you weird if you do that.
What kind of response do they give you when you tell them that?
Well, it's real. They like that. That's one of the reasons I have a great rapport with kids of all kinds. I mean, gangbangers from the inner city of Chicago, killers, etc. I just tell it like it is, and they respect that. So many people in my field are, tell me how you feel.
Right.
Oh, I feel so bad. And I say, hey, man, you're going to do this. Here's what's going to happen to you. You might be making some chump change on the street, selling drugs at the corner for some dude. You're making less than what you would make at a McDonald's. Did you ever think about that?
Absolutely. I'm from Brooklyn, and I think in the beginning of the crack epidemic, it was always dangerous, right?
Right.
But you could kind of make money. I never sold drugs, but at a certain point, the hierarchy was defined and guys were just selling for other guys.
Dwayne, that's it. The kids get allured by quick money, right?
Right.
And okay, you can have $50 cash in your pocket in one day, but that career, that little job aspiration is short-lived. It's only going to be standing on that corner for a good year or so, and then they use you up, and then they got somebody else, and they don't realize that. They don't look at the bigger picture. But that's one of the problems we have with kids too, is that they don't look at the future. And what we don't realize about kids is that their brain isn't wired to look at the future. They don't have that literal cognitive ability to do that yet. So we're all trying as adults to go, think of the future. Think of the future. You're not going to get into Harvard if you don't do this, and kids are going, huh? I'm just worried about next weekend. I'm not worried about getting into Harvard.
Why do you think you became so good at what you do, particularly working with youth? But I think you kind of touched on that. So what I really want to ask is, why do you think you're so good at your job? Because I actually play a psychologist on this web series for the last, since last year. And my like super objective and MO being the psychologist on the show is that I just think it's interesting why people go bad, so to say. I like to discover that in people. And I always wondered that about people that work in psychiatry and psychology. So what is it about your job that you find so fascinating, you know? Well,
I think you hit one thing on the head, which is to be interested in people. And Koji can relate to this, as Koji's a writer as well. And, you know, as a writer, one of the key skills you have to have as a writer is observation of people, right? And so the same interest that I have in my field, my day job, I call it, as a psychologist, is the same as I have as a writer, is to get behind the character. What is behind that? I'm a very good mimicker of people. And where does that come from? Because you observe. So like you, Jen, in your acting career and in the podcast, if you work on your mimicking skills, you know, to just try to empathize and mimic that character. How would that character be? You'll get really good as a psychologist. Now, back to the one aspect of the question that you asked is, why do I think I'm so good? Is because two things. One is that I come from I mean, not a Borscht Belt comedian poor, but my family was poor. I grew up on the streets of Chicago myself, so I know these people. You know, these are the guys that were beating me up and hassling me at the corner and taking my football gear and throwing it in trees and taking my books and running away with my books. And I never had a bicycle because everybody stole bikes, you know, in my neighborhood. But long story short, I grew up with these guys. So I know these guys, the guys I hung around with, the guys I had to deal with every day. And so I think that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that I'm real. I don't play around with people. I call it like it is. And, you know, I've studied this. We have a lot of science in this field. And that's the other thing people don't realize. We're just not like, oh, gee, shucks. You know, I think this is maybe, you know, we know what we're doing in this field now after doing it for 100 years. You know, we know a couple of things, and I study the field thoroughly as well. That's why Cambridge gave me that award, is that, you know, I'm a researcher as well.
What is the number one misconception people have of children who are going through kind of these troubles?
They assume that they know how to and are expected to act like an adult, like you and I would act.
The kids.
Yeah, the kids. You know, the adult world assumes that kids have all the skills that they need just because they might be 6'4" and wear the latest fashions and have a Gucci chain around their neck, that they think that, well, they must be with it and know how to become an adult, and they don't. So that's a misconception. You know, they're not finished people. That's the other thing that has made me successful, is I never considered these kids, you know, to be my equal.
Right. Right. And you know, what's interesting about that is that someone like you who's trying to help the situation realizes they're not full-fledged adults, but sadly manipulators realize that too.
Yeah.
It's weird to be on both sides of that spectrum where, well, both of you know these are vulnerable people, except one's trying to help and one's trying to not help or, you know, exploit, as it were.
And Dwayne, that takes a lot of forms, you know, in terms of studying people. And it kind of gets back to what Jennifer was saying as well. And really segues into our topic today, because as I was watching some of the material about the Ramseys, you know, a lot of these commentators were making assumptions about how they should have acted when their child was killed.
Right.
You know, and it kind of pissed me off that, you know, these commentators were like, well, look at, they don't look so devastated. Well, how would you act? Is there any stereotypic way in which you're supposed to act when your child got brutally murdered? You know, but we'll get into that when we get into the topic. But it gets back to your point, is that one of the things that people don't get is that you really have to get inside the head of victims. You have to get inside the head of the family of victims, and how would they react? And there's no one single way to act.
Before we begin, we want to note that since our subject this month involves real people, some of whom are still alive, we will take it on with a bit more seriousness than some of our previous episodes. We hope you understand.
One of the things we all watched to give us some background on the subject was the 2020 documentary, The List, Who Killed JonBenet. So we'll put a link in the show notes.
Here are the facts, guys.
JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6th, 1990. In Atlanta, Georgia. Her father, John, was a multimillionaire businessman, and Patricia, or Patty, her mom, was a Miss West Virginia beauty queen. JonBenet had one sibling, Burke, who was 3 years older, according to reports they lived a very comfortable and happy life in Boulder, Colorado.
They had a 4,000 square foot house. And that was huge. In LA, that's like $10 million.
Now, you've probably seen the disturbing pictures of her dressed up for the child beauty pageant, which is perhaps one of the reasons this case got national attention.
Super curious, John, what do you think about those kinds of beauty pageants for girls?
Didn't we coin a term earlier? Creepy?
Right.
You know, I think what's creepiest about this is the contrast. When you looked at the 2020 video, you know, and you see her at like Christmas time opening gifts as a normal little girl. And then the stark difference between her as this beauty queen to me was shocking and weird.
Right.
I haven't really been exposed a lot to those little kids that do that. And so I probably saw at some point years ago some brief video of that whole thing, but it was shocking to me to see the difference.
Jennifer, you never did those beauty contests, did you, as a little girl?
No, I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't. But I will say the only other thing that's comparable to that is child actors. You know, I always thought child acting is a weird thing. I think Julianne Moore at one point had said she thought children shouldn't be allowed. Anyone under 18 shouldn't be allowed to be actors. But I find that the beauty pageant thing for children is even on another level besides being a child actor, because it's with child acting, it's an art. I think it's different. It's a profession. They're working professionals. Whereas we're like the beauty pageant thing, I feel like has a little of that, but worse.
I was telling you guys earlier that I watched Toddler and Tiaras because it's like a car accident. But the one time that I liked the show was when it was this little boy. I think he was probably like 8 or 9 years old. And he was competing in this competition to be the prince or whatever. And he was super excited because he got to wear nice clothes and he got to be fabulous. And it was really awesome to see because he was so excited. And it didn't involve him wearing swimwear or trying to look like an adult male or trying to look sexy. So I thought that was the only time I thought, this is really awesome. And the father, who was this trucker looking guy, was really supportive of his son, who was clearly already very gay. And I loved that his father was supportive and that he wanted to be there. He was having so much fun. Whereas when I watch the little girls, a lot of times they're stressed. They don't look like they're having fun. They're being objectified. So that's when it's usually not good.
I will interject, Koji, that if you look at those pictures of JonBenet, she certainly looked like she enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And again, as we were talking about and getting to know each other here today, look at it through the child's eyes. And like it or leave it, this young lady was brought up kind of with traditional male-female stereotypes. Mm. And so she loved the dress-up part of it. And she looked like she really liked, you know, putting on the fancy clothes and the makeup. And she was all into it. She certainly didn't look like she was forced into it, you know, and we don't know that background, you know, who came up with this idea to put her in the beauty contest. That's a whole other question that nobody ever asked these people. But look at it through how maybe she felt about it. You know, it's dress up, it's Barbie. She gets the play act. And that's like Jennifer was saying with these kids. And I think that's the sadness of it, is that these kids are kind of seduced into doing some things that we're looking at going, well, this is kind of creepy, but they're like prancing around and having a great time. You know?
It feels like it's the public nature of it, because if you give a boy, if we're going to be traditional, if you give a boy like Legos or some kind of construction set, it's like, okay, right? If you give a girl a doll, it's okay. It's the public sort of display that kind of puts it in another strata. But even if you have young males doing go-karts, no one thinks anything of it.
Right.
It's something about most parents, again, you can't like judge people because they don't do what you would do, but most parents want to slow the aging process with their children. You know, they grow up too fast, which is what you always hear. And then you have a case here where it seems like they were like rushing it a bit. I think that's the thing that really doesn't sit well with people. Obviously, that it seems sexualized a bit.
On the morning of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey discovers that JonBenet is missing. She finds a 2.5-page ransom note at the bottom of the stairs asking for $118,000 and stating that they would be in contact the following day between 8 and 10 a.m. So the following day comes and goes, and there is no call from the kidnappers. The detective on the scene, Linda Arndt, claims that the parents didn't seem to notice or care. The detective encourages the family to see if they can find any signs that things are out of place in the house.
Jennifer just said two things, which really I took umbrage at when I was watching the 2020. One of the reporters, and I didn't memorize the name, goes, you know, no killers, kidnappers' notes are 2.5 pages long. well, listen, lady, is there any rules to kidnapping a kid? Is there like a book you're given that these are the rules of kidnapping? So, I can't write a 2.5-page kidnap note. They have to only be 1 page and 3 sentences. That was a ridiculous statement. The second thing that I think I took umbrage is that, everybody talked about their reaction. This is where they started with, well, gee, you got this note and look at the reaction of these people. Oh, they don't look like the people that their daughter just got kidnapped or they're missing. Well, again, do people give parents a manual as to how they're supposed to act when their child is missing or kidnapped? So it started a cycle of, I think, the media already kind of jading the narrative towards the parents being guilty and maybe somehow responsible for this thing. And I took a lot of umbrage at that.
For the note, I think the point for me was that that's a lot of note writing to write in the house when you're about to kidnap a little girl. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. If I was going to break into your house and kidnap your child, my note would be pretty short, or I'd pre-write it, right? I wouldn't spend 2.5 pages writing.
Except, Koji, the whole crime is not a quick crime. That's another thing I think that even some of the police were missing. Whoever did this spent a lot of time. This whole theory of there was accidentally the parents hurt the child and then they tried to cover it up and all this kind of stuff. Whatever crime here was committed, this took a lot of time. We had a fractured skull. We had this choking of her with the garrote. This is almost ritualistic.
I've never heard that from anybody because they always mention how long the note is. I mean, that's all that anywhere ever talks about.
But it should be from the perspective of, like what you said, Koji, if that's an anomaly that matters, it matters because they maybe wrote it there. And what kind of person would write that letter? And did it happen before or after she died? The length itself isn't like Exhibit A. It's sort of like the length of the note with the fact that it was the paper from the house or how long or when it happened, those kind of things. They still don't 100% prove the parents did it. It can kind of make, sometimes law enforcement gets lazy they get one kind of glaring thing and they just run with it, which they should, but they shouldn't exclude them from running with other things, And
Dwayne, don't get us started on the laziness of that Boulder Police, because even in the 2020 episode, it almost looked like Andy and Mayberry, the way the police were handling this the crime scene was compromised. There were things done that, most police, I work with police all around the country and all around the world, and most police would shake their head at many of the procedures that were done. And then again, it gets back to the social station of these people. I think there was a lot of things forgiven from normal police procedure because, well, this is, as Koji said, this is people that live in Boulder with a 4,000 square foot house. The guy's a multimillionaire, but that's, absolutely terrible police work.
It is alleged that John heads directly to the basement where he finds his daughter's body. According to John Ramsey, she was lying on a white blanket. The blanket was wrapped around her. Her hands were tied above her head. She had tape over her mouth. I immediately knelt down over her, felt her cheek, took the tape off immediately off her mouth. I tried to untie the cord that was around her arms, and I couldn't get the knot untied. JonBenet's skull had been fractured. She had been sexually assaulted and had been strangled with a garrote made from one of Patty's paintbrushes.
Again, I go back to the time taken here. This crime took a lot of time. This is not just smacking somebody on the head and running away.
It taking so much time. What does it say to you in terms of possibly suspects or possibly how comfortable they felt?
What people don't understand, and even is portrayed in documentaries and movies and on killers, and particularly serial killers, is that they all have a worldview. They all have their modus operandi, their way in which they're going to commit their crimes, which makes sense to them. It doesn't necessarily make sense to us. And I think that's part of the puzzle of this whole crime, is that, well, why would they write the note in the house? Why would the note be that long? As Dwayne was talking about, they could have had a cheat sheet copy of the note that they were going to write, but they wanted to write the note in the house with house materials. Why would they use the broken paintbrush to not only sexually molest her, but also to create the garrote? This might not make sense to us, but to the killer, this is part of their worldview. This is part of their operation. And to solve the crime, and nobody's talked about this case, you need to get in that mindset of why did this make sense to the killer? why did this make sense to this person doing that? So the length of time taken is part, to me, of a whole ritual that I've seen in serial killers that I've had to evaluate and called in on cases where, this is the way that person wanted to do this crime.
So interesting.
The suspects. There have been no significant leads in the case, but here are some of the people generally considered suspects by the public. Of course, John and Patsy Ramsey. First, it is important to note that both parents were exonerated in 2008 through DNA evidence. The general prevailing theory has always been one of them accidentally, as we talked about, killed JonBenet and then attempted to hide it by making up the kidnapping. Here are some of the facts, quote unquote, people cite as to why they think the parents did it. Inconsistencies to their story and the fact that they were not initially interviewed separately by the police, which is outrageous. Even in second grade, you separate and you ask the two people separately.
Exactly.
The fact that the ransom note was written from paper within the house, as we talked about. Fibers found on the duct tape were the same found on Patty's clothes. The dollar amount in the ransom note, $118,000, was the exact amount John received in his holiday bonus that year.
I think that's the weirdest one, by the way.
Yeah, but if your bonus pay is $118,000, you're really caked out.
We're all in the wrong profession.
Right.
But the fact that they knew, they might know something of this family.
Exactly. The fact that John went straight to the basement, moved the body upstairs, removed the tape, and put a blanket over it, essentially destroying or tainting all of the physical evidence. Of course, both parents completely deny any involvement in JonBenet's death.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that bonus, and I know you're intrigued by it, Koji, and I have a theory about that. Again, this whole thing, Jennifer is going to like this whole thing of empathizing with someone else or in a different era. These are the 90s, and it probably wasn't apparent in the 90s about hacking or getting into people's information through their computers or getting into their bank account. And I have a theory that the killer was probably savvy with, electronics or being able to hack in or somehow get into the information systems of the Mr. Ramsey in particular. But we wouldn't have thought about it, and the police wouldn't have thought about it in those days because it wasn't a thing in the 90s. Now we consider it like it's an everyday thing to get hacked or, scammed, etc. But that was a burgeoning industry there.
And one thing I'll say about the John going straight down to the basement and messing with the crime scene, I think something that you said, John, really stands out to me. When you say, well, that's not how I would have acted. I think before I had a child, I would have said, well, that's crazy. I would definitely not do anything, right? But now that I have a child and I put myself in that situation, I think the first thing I would do is go to the body, lift him up and take him somewhere to help him. But in my head, I'm like, no, of course not. That's terrible.
Oh yeah, that was another stark thing about the reporting that I'm going, yeah, you don't even have children. And then Patty, the mom, remember what she did when the child came upstairs and was laid on the floor? She said, I immediately put my body over her and hugged her and put my cheek to her. That's what a mom would do.
Right.
These high and mighty reporters are saying, well, this is strange behavior.
And also the cops should have cleared the house before that, like as soon as they came, right?
Well, that was another thing, Dwayne, they brought up in the 2020 report is that the cops did clear the house, but that they didn't go into that particular room where they found it.
Yeah.
There's where that Andy Mayberry police work is going on,
Doesn't everyone watch like enough horror movies and thriller movies that people's bodies are usually in the friggin' basement? Like that's where the shit goes down. The cops should have known. Burke Ramsey, like his parents, Burke was completely exonerated through DNA evidence in 2008. Some investigators believe that Burke may have killed his sister over a fight about a late night pineapple snack, pineapple, which was later found in JonBenet's stomach. So he, like his parents, completely denies any involvement in his sister's death.
And I just want to say real quick, if in 1996, you make so much money that your bonus is double what most people make in 1996, if not triple, I don't think you are short on pineapple.
I think that's a great comment.
Someone outside the family could be a suspect. The police initially did not believe it could have been an intruder. They claimed there were no footprints, but the crime scene was never secured. So it is difficult to know that for sure. But some investigators, both amateur and professional, believe the police have not looked enough at the possibility it was someone outside the family. So here are some of those people. The town drifter. He was a convicted pedophile living in the area and was found with a picture of JonBenet from a magazine. DNA eventually cleared him. the electrician. He allegedly had a property dispute with the Ramseys. However, he too was cleared through DNA.
The school teacher. A substitute teacher obsessed with the case confessed to killing JonBenet, but it was later discovered that he was lying and could not have been involved in the murder. The housekeeper. The Ramseys' housekeeper purportedly needed money, which could be a motive for the ransom. However, it is all circumstantial and no charges have ever been filed against her. There was the town Santa. Allegedly, the town Santa took a special interest in JonBenet. Although this makes for a good story, apparently there is zero evidence of any involvement or wrongdoing. A local reporter. This reporter allegedly was turned in by his partner, who claimed that he was missing on the 26th and came back with dirty clothes. His handwriting could not be eliminated from the person who wrote the ransom note. No charges have ever been filed against him.
Here's some kind of wacky theories. One is Ghislaine Maxwell of Jeffrey Epstein fame, the gatherer of the girls. They say she's in the background of JonBenet's last known photograph. This is completely untrue. It's like those infomercials at 2 a.m. Like, if they had something that like cured every disease, you would know about it. It wouldn't be an infomercial 2 a.m. And also, JonBenet never died. That's another theory. She just became Katy Perry. I actually like that one. One person believes her eyebrows are exactly the same. Could this be true?
So funny. I had never heard of that until we did the research, by the way, for this case. That was the first I'd heard of the Katy Perry connection. JonBenet was killed in some satanic ritual gone wrong. Another theory that's one of the wacky ones is a wolf killed her, a wolf. And the whole ransom note was a cover up by the parents.
This is my favorite one. It was the APAC. This says the Asian Pacific American Coalition, which is the APAC, was an active liberal political group operating out of Colorado University. And the request for $118,000 written in the ransom could have actually been code for JonBenet's time of death, which aligns well with her actual time of death around 1:18 a.m. As if this conspiracy isn't already crazy enough, APAC disbanded just weeks after the young starlet's murder. By the way, we took that exactly from Ranker, so that's not our writing, just to be clear. Another one, and my favorite, is the aliens. The aliens were jealous of JonBenet Ramsey's beauty, of course. And if you need proof, in the ransom note, the writer wrote foreign fraction, which of course means aliens from outer space. And another one is, of course, everything's tied to 9/11. The people behind 9/11, it was them that did it. And I would try to explain it to you guys, but it's just way too complicated and we would need another 20 minutes to do so.
When we come back, we'll put our minds together and figure out what really maybe happened.
We can use your help. We aren't on a big network and we don't have big backers. We aren't getting paid. Wait, we're not getting paid? That's why we need your help. Please, please, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Any amount helps us pay for the show. We're planning on having exclusive content for our supporters, so stay tuned.
Now that we've discussed the facts, let's workshop our ideas.
On the heels of the wacky theories, I have my own wacky theory.
Let's hear it.
All right. Now you got to put your mind into the 2020 broadcast. Anybody think about the eerie association of that Amy Robush, that reporter, the blonde reporter, and how eerily she looks like JonBenet and how interested she was in the facts. She didn't have that kind of manufactured reporter speak to her. And I got a feeling that JonBenet didn't die, and she is Amy Robush. She's about the right age. She's in her 30s. And I think she's a reporter for 2020.
Stalled. The case is stalled.
Boom. Boom.
Right.
Mic drop.
Oh my God, that's too funny.
My theory. So the Ramsey family was very aware, even though they didn't necessarily handle the press very well. They were very press savvy, I think. They were thinking iconic. They wanted to make their family really famous, but they couldn't get into Hollywood. They couldn't write a book. They couldn't, do those kinds of things. So what they decided to do as a family was to create the ultimate true crime. So that everything was faked. This whole thing was faked. And they just put enough evidence here and there just to make them think that it's the family, but so that the whole conversation is always on this case forever. Because now everyone will always be talking about it.
And JonBenet is Amy Robush.
Right.
Or Katy Perry.
JonBenet's alive somewhere.
So you mean the death is fake too?
Everything was fake. They just got another body that looked like JonBenet.
Interesting. This one is tough. The father kind of makes sense. But the fact that it was so mishandled in terms of how they handled the first few days of the investigation, my theory would have to be it's someone in law enforcement. And you don't want to, say that, right? Because, to protect and to serve, and most law enforcement people do that. But I think even the person who told them, I think it was the Linda, who kind of seems like she seems to think and intimate that she thinks it's the father, but she's the one who told them to search the house again. And so it's kind of like that scene in The Godfather when he says, like, whoever comes to you and tells you to set up the meeting is the traitor, right? So whosever idea it was to search the basement is the person, or they know what happened. And so the fact that she told him, I think if I heard it correctly on the 2020 thing, like I think first time investigator person, she told him to search the basement. So it's either her or her superiors, because one, why do you put her on a case? It's like Ted Lasso, right? When you hire Ted Lasso, who's a American football coach, to coach your soccer team, then you're sabotaging your soccer team, right? That's what you hope will happen. So I think it's law enforcement. I'm not sure who. I don't know if it's that lady Linda, because it seems like a male kind of crime. And I'm assuming that DNA was male DNA, but I would say either law enforcement or someone they, for whatever reason, had to cover it up for. And then that's by making it look like the parents, then like it only takes one person in law enforcement to taint that crime scene, to make it look like the parents. But then also you simultaneously can't prove it's the parents. And then you also force everyone else to stop looking for whoever it was. So I'm not saying it's like the whole Boulder Police force, but it could just be one person in the force.
But Dwayne, you kind of lead into my second wacky theory, and that is it's a community event.
Oh, that's so scary, though. Don't say that. That's terrifying.
The whole community, almost like a little Stepford kind of situation where, this is Boulder. It's that community where all these 4,000 square foot houses, and little girl disrupted that nice harmony they had. She can't, stand out so much. And so, and the ineptness of the police investigation and a lot of the things that were missed, the whole community came after this kid.
What's scary about that is the fact that all their friends came over and no one thought, you guys can't be here. They touched everything. It does seem like they were all in on it. But then it becomes why, right? And then it's also my question, John, would be, are the parents in on it?
Shades of Rosemary's Baby.
I'm thinking some evil entity made the community do this, and they had to do it to get this like evil spirit lifted or whatever.
Koji, take notes. We could have a screenplay out of this one.
My theory, there was a sort of, I hate to say it, it's so hard to say, like a sex club. So like a community sex ring. And that the parents were in on it because they were in charge of this pedophile sex ring with their daughter. It was their little club, and something went wrong that night, and a molestation or whatever. One of those suspects could have been the homeless person, could have been Santa Claus, could have been a neighbor, could have been the maid. One of them accidentally killed her. And then the parents and the parents mainly covered it up.
One minor note that was made in the 2020 broadcast was that, and I might have these stats wrong, but didn't they say that something like 20 or 50 pedophiles lived in that area?
They did say that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And I think it was 50. That's a hell of a lot of pedophiles in a small community like that, so I think you're onto something.
Here's the thing is I don't know who it was that accidentally killed her, but that's why there was somebody else's DNA on her because it was somebody else that, jizzed. Koji, am I going in bad territory here? Somebody did something at some point earlier that day, or I don't know. Maybe everybody was there.
Right. And that's the thing. Is the DNA the killer's DNA or someone else's DNA?
Isn't this what QAnon is all about? That there's a pedophile sex ring?
Oh, yeah.
So, it's not that far apart from those people. But John, love to hear your thoughts.
Nobody's talked about this Detective Lou Smith, which I thought he was the best character in this whole story. I think this guy was onto something. He was the fellow who crawled through the window. And again, the Boulder Police said, well, we didn't look at the window because, it didn't seem like it would provide any access. And this older fella just kind of crawls in through it like it's nothing. I think Lou Smith was on to something, and I in the direction of agreeing with him that it was an outsider. John, getting back to your theory, just to give you a statistic, it's very rare. I mean, the statistics are like 0.5% that a biological parent will do such a heinous sex act, an incestuous sex act with their own child. Typically, when we see child sexual abuse, it's a step parent or an uncle or a relative. When it's a relative, let alone most child sexual abuse is done by somebody who's not biologically connected. But anyway, I think it's an intruder. I think an intruder came in. And again, given some of the tidbits I've been saying through the program, I think this person has a worldview that makes a lot of sense of a ritualistic killing. I agree with this Lou Smith at one point saying that not only is the killer out there, but probably there's going to be other crimes in this direction. Statistics or facts about my theory is that there's probably at any given time 300 to 500 serial killers running around the United States that we don't even know about. And so I think we have a serial killer that has done this, has his own ritualistic way of doing this. And how many of nobody's looked at other crimes that have similar connections in even one or two ways. So I think it's an intruder.
Wow. What's crazy about that is it seems like people who do that, they don't stop. And sometimes they also increase in frequency.
And Dwayne, here's another thing that we talked about movies and portrayal of these people. And many times to make it dramatic, the movie or documentary says, and here's an indication of they wanted to be caught. That's false. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be caught. They want to go merrily on their way and keep doing this ad infinitum. So this was carefully done not to catch them, implicate the parents. This person, fits the profile of a serial killer that in their own world, they're pretty intelligent, in what they're doing. They have it thought out. And, the hacking I mentioned before, this person wanted everything to point at anything but their involvement with the case.
All right. Well, we're at the point in the show where we have to choose the unofficial official story. So let's see which one we wanted to pick. I will say I love the one that the town does it. It feels very like village to me. And it's kind of the most, it's the one where they all kind of came together and kind of almost shunned. That's the one I like the best. But Dwayne, which one did you like the best?
I like that one too, only because it kind of encapsulates the others in a way. And I also think that in terms of just sort of like someone who doesn't know any of these people, and if I'm to just let it go, I mean, I can let it go, no problem. But that's the one that helps me let it go the most, because so many things were done wrong. Let's just say it was the whole town and keep moving. You know what I mean?
Although I will say that two smart people, so John and the detective, both said that it was probably an intruder. So it's probably most likely, I think it's probably most likely an intruder. But with that being said, I think it's more fun to say it's the whole community. But Jennifer, what were you thinking?
I like the community one because I feel like I've never even thought of that. Like a village scenario where they all came down on it for whatever reason. I don't know why. Like you said, was she taking their fame? Is that what you touched on, John? That
she was calling too much attention to the community. If you had a scenario where the community was involved in some kind of nefarious activity, like a sex club, like you said, or demonic kind of rules or anything, you wouldn't want notoriety. And this girl was getting tremendous notoriety. We got to get rid of her, putting too much of a spotlight on this little wonderful thing we got going here.
I think that's my fave because it's so unique, and it would make a really crazy, like if we made an actual episode of this episode, visually, video-wise, that would be really crazy to make.
And John, what are you thinking?
I like this community idea as well. I'm already starting to write the screenplay on this. This is Rosemary's Baby redo.
Right.
It works metaphorically too, right? Because metaphorically, it is the whole community. This doesn't happen in like places where there's guys hanging outside, bebopping. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so by even having this seclusion, you create the situation that allows an outsider to come in.
Dwayne, I think that's brilliant. And think about, you're right, metaphorically, we contribute to the fact that we're clapping for this little girl prancing around and creating this whole thing. That was good.
So who killed her? They did. And that is the unofficial official story. We'll take another break. And when we return, we'll each give you guys some important advice. Okay, this month we're going to do something that Koji does in every one of his screenwriting classes. Koji, care to explain?
Okay, so in each of my classes, I feel the need to give my students advice on how not to be a victim of a crime, but sometimes that always turns into how to get away with a crime, specifically murder.
And in honor of that and our subject, let's share our best how to stay safe advice or how to get away with murder advice.
So my first and most important advice is always it's okay to be weird and make people feel uncomfortable. So especially for women, if you're ever in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, it's okay to be rude, but it's okay to make a scene if you feel like you're in danger. I think too many times we're taught as humans in this society that we have to go along, that we don't want to make a scene. But a lot of times that feeling inside of you is there for a reason. It's there to prevent you from being a victim, that we put ourselves too many times in situations to try to get along instead of being safe. And I think that that's the number one thing I always tell young women in my class is that if you ever feel uncomfortable, it's okay to make a scene. And if it becomes uncomfortable later, that's fine. At least you're alive, as opposed to the opposite, which is you're dead. You should have made a scene earlier. So you never go into somebody's car, never go to somebody's apartment, never walk on the street by yourself if you feel uncomfortable. All those things are facts and that you should always be aware. And the most important thing is your safety and not someone's feelings.
Great advice.
That is great advice. Absolutely.
My advice is if you're in a sticky situation or you think you're going to get murdered or you're about to be kidnapped is seduction. I used to oddly fantasize that if an intruder ever came into my house, I would give them a blowjob to blow them, to seduce them or something to like throw them off. That was always my thing is if I'm ever in a weird situation, whether it's a girl or a guy, I'm going to try to manipulate them. And try to, I don't know if I think there's a theory for that, right? When you start to make friends and trust the kidnapper.
The Stockholm theory.
Yeah. So it's a little of that.
I know of cases that it works, but I've also heard of cases where people get more angry about it, right, John? Does that sometimes happen?
Yeah, Jen, I didn't want to step on your toes. I was just not going to say anything at all. But yeah, not good advice.
It's not good advice. Darn.
You're not a pro at this, so if you try to out manipulate or out trick an intruder or somebody who's violent, you got to understand, this is their whole life. They're better at it than we are. So you're never going to win them over. So I wouldn't advise that. And no blowjobs.
Right. Although if it came to that, then you could just bite down.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's sort of like an advice suite, if you will, along the lines of what Koji said. One, always expect and think the worst. Thinking the worst is not a crime. It's not something that people should get upset about, especially if you don't say it, but think the worst. And if you're from an inner city, that's how you're raised. Think the worst. And that'll inform everything else. You don't have to say, I think you are a murderer, but you think it and you move accordingly. I would say keep your phone fully charged as much as you can and have the best phone service you can. And third, tell people where you're going, because I think sometimes you might be doing something you're not super proud of or whatever, or going someplace, but you have to have those 2 or 3 people you tell. Now, that might just help them recover you as opposed to save you. But when you go missing or something like that, to that effect, the quicker someone can positively say they went here, they went there, the quicker people can get on your trail.
And John, why don't you tell us yours?
2 things. One, very quickly, I totally agree with Dwayne, and I call it city sense.
Right.
You have to have some city sense to you where, you're looking around. You do have a swivel head and you're looking around that thing. You don't walk down Fifth Avenue in New York with your purse wide open, which I saw one time, a woman walking down with her purse wide open, and somebody just out of the blue went up there, put his hand in her purse and ran away. So city sense is important. Now, this is a real practical tip, though, I want to say about being safe, and it's very important, which young people don't do. Ask a veteran of the scene, what are some of the things that I need to know? Like, for example, don't leave your drink unattended. Don't leave your purse on a stool. What kind of guys to look out for? What kind of girls to look out for? Ask somebody who's been around and been at the scene. I call it asking a veteran. Give me some tips. What should I do when I go out? And they'll give you some very practical advice, which listen to and take to heart.
I noticed that no one said how to get away with murder. So I'll give my number one how to get away with murder advice, just so that we say both sides. My number one piece of advice is murder in different counties with different jurisdictions as much as possible. Because if you stay in one place, the flags will go up quicker. The more you move around, that's why the Golden State Killer got away with it for so long, was because he was murdering in different areas. And now people talk a little bit more than before, but still, different jurisdictions and bureaucracies make it a little bit more difficult to get caught.
Thank you, John, for coming on with us. Please tell us where people can follow you.
Well, a couple of things. I have, like everybody else in the universe, I have a website. It's drjohnmayer.com. I also have my own podcast called Anxiety's a Bitch, chock full of techniques and tips on how to deal with stress and anxiety and getting good sleep.
Thank you so much again, John, for coming on. And thank you all, Unofficial Official Story listeners. There are a million podcasts out there, so we are so honored you've chosen ours to listen to.
Please check out our website, unofficialofficialstory.com, for our show notes or to hear our past episodes.
And be sure to come back next month when we answer the question, what happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370?
It's the same place JonBenet is.
Right.
It's the same community.
Exactly. All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.